I caught my sister's husband in our childhood treehouse with my mom. It was a perfect late summer Saturday, the kind of day that feels like it was gift-wrapped by a benevolent God. The air was warm but not humid, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint, sweet perfume of my mom's prize-winning roses. We were having our first full family reunion in nearly a decade at my parents' old farmhouse, the place where my sister and I had grown up. The yard was a chaotic symphony of laughter, the sizzle of burgers on the grill, and the distant thwack of a wiffle ball bat. It was, for all intents and purposes, a portrait of domestic bliss, a Norman Rockwell painting brought to life. My sister, Jessica, was there with her husband, Mark. They were the golden couple, the ones who had it all figured out. Jessica, with her easy smile and a career that was actually going somewhere, and Mark, the charming, handsome architect who always knew the right thing to say. They'd been married for 8 years, and from the outside, their marriage looked as solid as the ancient oaks that lined our property. My own parents, Carol and David, were playing the part of the happy retirees to perfection. Dad was manning the grill, a beer in one hand, a spatula in the other, holding court with my uncles. Mom was flitting from group to group, ensuring everyone had a drink and a paper plate, her laughter a constant, reassuring soundtrack to the day. Watching them all, a wave of nostalgia washed over me so powerfully it almost knocked me off my feet. This was the good stuff. This was what memories were made of. My eyes drifted past the throng of cousins and second cousins, past the picnic tables laden with more food than any of us could possibly eat, and settled on a familiar silhouette at the far edge of the property. It was the old maple tree, and nestled in its sturdy branches was our childhood treehouse. That rickety wooden box was more than just a play structure. It was a sanctuary. It was a pirate ship, a castle, a spaceship, and a secret clubhouse all rolled into one. It was where Jessica and I had whispered our childhood dreams and plotted our imaginary rebellions. A sudden, powerful urge to see it, to touch it, to reclaim a small piece of that uncomplicated past came over me. I excused myself from a conversation with an aunt about the merits of organic gardening, promising to be back in a few minutes. The walk to the treehouse was a journey through time itself. With each step, the sounds of the party grew a little more muted, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. I remembered the feel of the rough bark under my small hands, the splinters I'd gotten, the triumphant feeling of reaching the top. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. The rope ladder, which usually hung limp and empty, was taut, as if it was bearing weight. And I could hear a sound. It wasn't the creak of branches or the call of a bird. It was a low, rhythmic creaking, coming from the treehouse itself, punctuated by a soft, muffled sound I couldn't quite place. My first thought was that a cousin's kid had gotten up there and was jumping around. I smiled, ready to playfully scold them. I reached for the first rung of the ladder, my curiosity piqued, completely unprepared for the scene that was about to shatter my perfect, nostalgic day into a million pieces. The sound I heard wasn't the wind, and it wasn't a kid jumping around. It was a rhythmic, squeaking groan, the kind of sound old wood makes when it's under a consistent, unusual strain. My hand froze on the rough, weathered rung of the rope ladder. I tilted my head, straining to listen past the distant party noise. There it was again, a soft, rhythmic squeak, 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 followed by a muffled, breathy sigh. It was a sound of exertion, but not the playful kind. It was a sound I recognized, but one that made absolutely no sense in this context. My heart began to thud against my ribs, a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. This was wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to walk back to the safety of the crowd and the noise and the sunshine, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the spot, and a morbid curiosity, the kind you can't look away from, had taken hold. I had to know. I placed my foot on the bottom rung, testing my weight. The ladder swayed slightly. I began to climb, each movement slow and deliberate, trying to be as silent as possible. The rough fibers of the rope dug into my palms. With each rung I ascended, the sounds from above became clearer, more distinct. The creaking was more pronounced now, and the sighs were deeper, more guttural. I could also hear a low murmur, a voice speaking in hushed, urgent tones. It was a man's voice, a familiar man's voice. My mind raced, trying to place it. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't one of my uncles. It was younger. As my head cleared the floor of the treehouse, the smell hit me first. It was a mix of dust, old wood, and something else. Something cloying and sweet, like a specific perfume my mom wore. My brain screeched to a halt. Mom's perfume? I peered through the small, square opening that served as the treehouse's doorway. The interior was dim, lit only by a few shafts of sunlight piercing through the cracks in the wooden planks. And there, on the dusty floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood board games and comic books, were two figures. One was a man, his back to me, his shirt off, his shoulders tense and moving in a steady, unmistakable rhythm. The other was underneath him, her legs wrapped around his waist, her face turned away from me, buried in the crook of his neck. I saw the man's face as he turned his head slightly, his eyes closed in ecstasy. It was Mark, my sister's husband, Mark. The charming architect, the loving husband, the man who had just been holding my sister's hand and laughing with her dad not 20 minutes ago. A wave of nausea so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. My vision swam. I felt like I was going to be sick. But the worst, the most soul-destroying part, was when the woman underneath him arched her back, her head lolling to the side. A cascade of familiar, auburn hair spilled across the dusty floorboards, and I saw it. The delicate silver locket around her neck, the one my dad had given my mom for their 30th anniversary. The locket that held a tiny, faded picture of me and Jessica as children. It was my mom. It was Carol, Mom, and my sister's husband, in our childhood treehouse. The world didn't just break. It evaporated. There was no air, no sound, just the horrifying, silent movie playing out in front of me. My mind couldn't process it. It was a joke. It was a hallucination. It had to be. But the creaking of the wood and the scent of my mom's perfume were terrifyingly, devastatingly real. My feet hit the ground, but I felt like I was still falling, tumbling through an endless dark void. I didn't remember climbing down the ladder. One moment I was staring into the seventh circle of hell, and the next, my sneakers were sinking into the soft grass of the backyard. My body was moving on pure animalistic instinct. I stumbled away from the tree, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a gasp that felt more like a sob. I couldn't breathe. Each inhale was a shallow, painful gulp of air that burned my lungs. I could still hear them, the faint creaking and sighing from above, a soundtrack to my personal apocalypse. I half ran, half stumbled towards the old tool shed, a small, dilapidated building tucked behind a row of overgrown lilac bushes. I needed to hide. I needed to be invisible. I burst through the squeaky shed door and collapsed against a stack of old terracotta pots, my body shaking uncontrollably. I slid to the dirt floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The image was seared onto the back of my eyelids. Mark's back, my mom's hair, the locket, the rhythmic, disgusting motion. It played on a loop, a gif from hell. My stomach churned and I dry heaved, nothing coming up. This wasn't real. This was a nightmare. Any second now I was going to wake up in my old childhood bed, the sun streaming through the window, and the whole family would be downstairs making pancakes. But the smell of gasoline and rust from the shed was too real. The throbbing in my head was too real. The cold, hard dread in the pit of my stomach was the most real thing I had ever felt. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I heard the rope ladder creak again, this time with the weight of someone descending. I held my breath, peering through a crack in the shed wall. I saw Mark climb down, his face flushed, his hair disheveled. He quickly smoothed his shirt, a look of furtive guilt on his face as he scanned the yard before making a beeline for the house. A moment later, my mom followed. She moved more slowly, her movements stiff. She paused at the base of the tree, her hand resting on the trunk for a moment, her expression unreadable from my vantage point. Then she too straightened her clothes and walked back towards the party, a mask of serene composure settling onto her features, as if she were merely returning from a private moment of reflection. The sight of them, trying to act normal, reignited a fire in my gut. The shock was beginning to crystallize into a cold, hard rage. What do I do? Who do I tell? My dad? The thought of seeing his face crumble was too much to bear. No, I had to tell Jessica. She was my sister. She was the one being betrayed in the most grotesque way imaginable. She had a right to know. I pushed myself up from the floor, my legs trembling but resolute. I took a deep, shaky breath and walked out of the shed. I had to find her. I scanned the crowd, my eyes landing on her near the punch bowl, laughing with one of our cousins. The sight of her happy, unsuspecting face was like a punch to the gut. I walked over, my feet feeling like they were made of lead. I tapped her on the shoulder. She turned, her eyes sparkling. I didn't say a word. I just grabbed her arm, my grip tight, and pulled her away from the crowd, towards the side of the house, away from prying eyes and ears. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and concern as she saw the devastation on my face. The sound of a screen door slamming shut was the starting pistol for the end of my family as I knew it. I had pulled Jessica behind the tall hydrangea bushes that lined the side of the house, a spot we had used for secret conversations 100 times as kids. But this was no childhood secret. My throat was tight and the words wouldn't come. How could I possibly say this? How could I forge a sentence so vile, so destructive, that it would obliterate the world she lived in? I just shook my head, tears welling in my eyes, my hand still gripping her arm. Her expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She started asking questions with her eyes, her brow furrowed. I could see her mind racing through possibilities. Was it Dad? Was he sick? Did someone get in a car accident? I finally managed to choke out a few words, my voice a hoarse, broken whisper. I told her I needed her to listen to me, to not interrupt, to just hear me out. I told her I had gone to the treehouse. I saw her flinch at the mention of it, a flicker of a shared happy memory crossing her face before the dread in my expression snuffed it out. And then I said it. I said the words that would forever split our lives into a before and an after. I told her what I saw. I described the scene, the sounds, the details. I watched her face, a canvas of shifting emotions. First, there was utter disbelief. Her eyes widened, and she actually let out a small, incredulous laugh, as if I had told her the most ridiculous joke she had ever heard. She shook her head, pulling her arm from my grasp. She mouthed the word no, her lips barely moving. But as I continued to speak, my voice gaining a sliver of strength from the sheer horror of it, the disbelief began to curdle. The laughter died on her lips. Her eyes, which had been wide with shock, narrowed. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pale, chalky white. She stopped shaking her head and went perfectly still. It was in that moment of stillness that I knew she believed me. The reality of it landed on her with the force of a physical blow. I saw something break behind her eyes. The happy, golden couple wife vanished, replaced by a stranger, a woman hollowed out by an incomprehensible betrayal. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just stood there for a second, her gaze fixed on the side of the house, processing the nuclear bomb I had just dropped into her life. Then she moved. She turned and walked away from me, her gait stiff and robotic. She didn't look back. She walked around the corner of the house, back towards the party. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding. I saw her approach Mark, who was laughing with my dad by the grill. She tapped him on the shoulder. He turned, his charming smile still in place, but it faltered when he saw her face. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw his reaction. A flicker of panic, followed by a quick, vehement shake of his head. Denial. But Jessica was relentless. She pointed a finger at him, her other hand clenched into a fist at her side. The smile on my dad's face faded as he sensed the tension. He looked from his daughter to his son-in-law, his brow furrowed with confusion. And then, Jessica did something that made my blood run cold. She turned her gaze from her husband and scanned the crowd, her eyes locking onto our mother, who was chatting with an aunt by the picnic table. The look on Jessica's face was pure, unadulterated venom. She started walking towards her, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not going to be a quiet confrontation. This was going to be an explosion. My mom's words cut through the screaming like a knife, but not in the way I expected. The scene had erupted into chaos the moment Jessica had confronted our mother, Carol. The happy buzz of the family reunion had died instantly, replaced by a horrified, gaping silence that was quickly filled by my sister's raw, guttural accusations. I watched from a few feet away, frozen in place, as the world I had always known imploded. Jessica's voice, usually so warm and melodic, was now a jagged shard of glass, accusing not just her husband, Mark, but our own mother of a betrayal so profound it felt surreal. Mark was sputtering denials, his face a mask of panic and sweat. My dad, David, stood there, his face a canvas of confusion, slowly dawning into the most soul-crushing realization I had ever witnessed. He looked from his hysterical daughter to his pale, trembling wife, and the pieces clicked into place with a visible, devastating finality. His face crumpled. The strong, jovial man who had been manning the grill just moments before was gone, replaced by a broken, hollowed-out stranger. The family members who had been caught in the blast radius were staring, their mouths agape, their plates of forgotten food growing cold in their hands. It was a spectacle of the highest order, a train wreck happening in slow motion in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration of family. And in the center of it all was my mom. While Mark was denying everything and Jessica was screaming, Carol was surprisingly calm. She stood there, her posture rigid, her face a mask of icy composure. When Jessica finally paused, her chest heaving with sobs, our mom finally spoke. Her voice wasn't apologetic or remorseful. It was cold, sharp, and laced with a venom that was decades in the making. She looked at my dad, her eyes filled with a contempt that was utterly foreign to me. "You think this is so shocking?" she said, her voice cutting through the air and silencing even Jessica's sobs. "You think you're such a victim, David? You stand there with your holier-than-thou expression, but you have no idea at all." Her words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. It wasn't a denial, it was a deflection, an attack. It was a bombshell within a bombshell. My dad just stared at her, his confusion now mingled with a dawning, weary horror. He looked like a man who was realizing the foundation of his 40-year marriage was not just cracked, but built on a sinkhole. "You think this is the first time?" my mom continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of her children, her sister, her friends. "You think your father is some kind of saint? You have no idea what goes on behind closed doors, no idea what I've had to endure." With that, she turned on her heel and walked into the house, slamming the screen door behind her with a final, echoing bang. The spell was broken. The reunion was officially over. The atmosphere was so thick with unspoken secrets and raw pain you could have choked on it. People started to leave, not even bothering to say goodbye, just gathering their things and their children and fleeing the toxic wasteland our backyard had become. I saw Mark get into his car and speed away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Jessica collapsed into a chair, her body racked with silent, violent sobs. And my dad just stood there by the grill, the burgers now charred to a crisp, staring at the closed door his wife had just disappeared through. He looked utterly, completely lost. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. 2 marriages destroyed in a matter of minutes. But my mom's parting words had opened up a chasm of questions, a dark, gaping hole in our family's history that I suddenly felt a terrifying need to explore. In the ruins of my family, I became an archaeologist of our own destruction. The days following the reunion were a blur of numb silence and frantic whispered phone calls. The house, once a hub of warmth and laughter, felt like a tomb. My dad moved through the rooms like a ghost, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a dry, raspy whisper. He had moved into the guest room, and the door to the master bedroom, where my mom had locked herself away, remained shut for 2 days. When she finally emerged, it was only to pack a suitcase. She didn't look at my dad or at me. Her face was a hard, unreadable mask. She left without a word, without a note, without a backward glance. The silence she left behind was deafening. Jessica had gone home with her husband, but not for reconciliation. She went to pack her things and to begin the painful, messy process of untangling her life from his. We spoke on the phone every day, her voice a mixture of rage, grief, and a profound, bottomless sadness. But it was my mom's final words at the reunion that haunted me. "You think this is the first time?" The phrase echoed in my mind, a relentless, nagging drumbeat. It wasn't just a desperate attempt to deflect blame. There was a truth to it, a bitter, venomous truth that hinted at a much larger, much older pattern of betrayal. I started thinking back, digging through my own memories, looking for clues I had missed. I remembered a time when I was a teenager, when my parents had a huge fight and my mom had disappeared for a weekend. The official story was that she had gone to visit a friend. I remembered another time, a few years later, when my dad's younger brother, my Uncle Tom, had a falling out with the family and we hadn't spoken to him in years. The reason was always vague, something about a business deal gone wrong. The pieces weren't fitting together, but I could feel the shape of something terrible lurking just beneath the surface. I needed to talk to someone. I needed an outside perspective. I called my Aunt Linda, my mom's younger sister. I hesitated, not knowing how to even begin the conversation, but I knew she was the only one who might have the answers. I started by telling her about the reunion, about Mark and my mom. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, a silence that was more telling than any words could have been. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with a sadness that felt ancient. She wasn't surprised, and that's when she confirmed my deepest fears. She told me about my mom's affair with my Uncle Tom. It wasn't about a business deal. It had been an affair, a long, drawn-out one that had nearly torn the family apart years ago. My dad had found out, and they had tried to repair things for the sake of the kids. But my mom had never truly forgiven my dad for what? For not being enough? For catching her? Aunt Linda wasn't sure, but the pattern was there. A history of seeking validation, of crossing lines, of destroying the very foundations of the family she was supposed to nurture. The revelation didn't just explain the past, it recontextualized the present. The affair with Mark wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest chapter in a long, tragic story of my mom's self-destruction and her casual, breathtaking disregard for the people who loved her. It wasn't about Mark. It wasn't about my uncle. It was about her, a deep, cavernous need that she tried to fill in the most destructive ways possible. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the house. The scope of the damage was so much bigger than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just 2 marriages that had been destroyed. It was the entire history of our family, a history that was now revealed to be a complete and utter lie. I had to decide what to do with this horrifying knowledge. Did I tell Jessica, piling more pain on top of her already broken heart? Or did I let the past stay buried, even as the present was burning to the ground? There's no clean way to end a story like this. There's only the aftermath, the slow, painful process of picking through the rubble and trying to figure out if anything is worth saving. In the end, I decided to tell Jessica. I couldn't let her carry the burden of this one betrayal, thinking it was the only one. She deserved to know the truth, however ugly. We sat in her now half-empty apartment, surrounded by packed boxes, and I told her what Aunt Linda had revealed. She listened, her face pale and stoic. She didn't cry. She just nodded, a slow, sad understanding in her eyes. It didn't make her hurt any less, but in a strange way, it helped. It reframed her personal tragedy as part of a much larger, much sadder family dysfunction. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't Mark's fault, not entirely. They were just the latest casualties in my mom's lifelong war on herself. The months that followed were a masterclass in the messy, complicated reality of divorce and family fracture. Jessica's divorce from Mark was finalized quickly, a quiet, sterile legal proceeding that stood in stark contrast to the emotional inferno that had preceded it. She threw herself into her work and into therapy, slowly, painstakingly building a new life for herself. She was different now, harder around the edges, but with a newfound strength that I admired. My parents' divorce was another story. It was a protracted, ugly battle, fought over assets and memories and decades of unspoken resentments. My dad, a man who had defined himself by his role as a husband and provider, was adrift. He sold the farmhouse, unable to bear the memories that haunted every room. He moved into a small condo, and we talked on the phone, our conversations stilted and awkward, two people who didn't know how to navigate the new, terrifying landscape of our broken family. I never saw my mom again. She moved to a different state, and any attempts I made to contact her were met with silence or with short, cold emails that offered no apology, no explanation, no remorse. She was a ghost, a phantom limb that ached with a pain I couldn't quite place. The last image I have of her is not from the reunion, but from a brief, chance encounter I had with her a few months later. I was in a city a few hours away from my hometown for work. I saw her across a busy street, walking with a man I didn't recognize. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the same easy, charming laugh she had always had. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of shame or sadness. There was nothing, just a cold, empty void. She looked away and continued on her way, disappearing into the crowd as if I had never existed. The treehouse is gone now. A few weeks after the reunion, my dad, in a fit of rage and grief, had taken a chainsaw to the old maple tree, cutting it down branch by branch until nothing was left but a stump. It was a symbolic act, a violent severing of the past. But the memories remain. I still have nightmares about the creak of the wood and the scent of my mom's perfume. My family is a constellation of broken stars scattered across the country, each of us trying to find our own light in the darkness. We talk, sometimes, Jessica and my dad and I. We are the survivors, the ones left to piece together a new definition of family from the shards of the old one. It's smaller now and quieter, and it's built on a foundation of shared trauma instead of shared history. But it's honest. And in the ruins of the life we once knew, that fragile, painful honesty is the only thing we have left to hold on to.